for those who had questions that were not addressed, but I invite you to ask them at the next opportunity. Now I'd like to call on the following individuals to come to the stage. Each of them will speak for a few minutes about the substantive challenges we face, and then we will have another opportunity, I hope, for some Q&A. So first of all, once again, and it's my great honor to do so, His Excellency, the President of Georgia, Mr. Giorgi Margvelashvili. Secondly, His Excellency, the Chairman of the Parliament of Georgia, Mr. David Usupashvili. Third, the leader of the opposition Free Democrats and the former Minister of Defense, Minister Irakli Alasania. Very nice to meet you, sir. Fourth, our friend and colleague, the former president of Freedom House and former Assistant Secretary of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, now the Director for Human Rights and Human Freedoms at the McCain Institute, David Kramer. And finally, Mr. Giorgi Baramidze, who's the Vice Speaker of the Parliament. Thank you all. And I think you now will each have an opportunity to speak for a few minutes, to present your view on the challenges, and then we can have how much time for each speaker? 5 minutes.
Okay, I don't think 5 minutes is I'll try to describe some of the basic factors that influence development of democracy in Georgia within this declining picture that Mr. Diamond has presented. Where is the place of the beacon of democracy? And so I'll try to somehow show what are the main factors. I don't think 5 minutes is enough, but I'll go with basics. Let's start with economic factors and where we are right now. Of course, we have a great achievement from last year, which is our the signing of the association agreement and the DCFTA as an opportunity and as a tool of strengthening and enlarging Georgian economy. This is a factor for democratic development because normally in democratic societies, it's easier to build democracy in a society which is a wealthier and which has more social protection. In this respect, Georgia has gained a great tool because through this CFTA, we have got an opportunity to modernize our economy, bring more investors. We have a much bigger and open market for investments, summed up with a great investment climate that we have in Georgia, which has been certified by many international organizations, with a very low taxation rate, with low level of crime and corruption. I think Georgia is becoming a very interesting investment place, which creates opportunities for growing business and which is a positive factor for developing and stabilizing democracy in Georgia. Georgia is also playing a significant role as a country which has determined its geopolitical place as a linkage between East and West, Asia and Europe, and being a country that's a gateway for transfer of energy resources and other commodities, and in this respect, it is also contributing to strengthening Georgia economically, and not only economically but security-wise, because more and more countries in the region, whether those are countries of the Caspian Sea basin, whether those are countries of Europe, are interested in more stable Georgia, because Georgia is providing stable economic opportunities to both regions. I think that in this respect, a week ago, we participated in the signature of the TANAP project, which is one of the great examples like this, because TANAP project will be providing Caspian energy resources directly to Europe, to the Southern Europe, and that is one of the serious guarantees. It's also important that we are developing our other communication systems. So, railways, and I'll try to be brief. I mean, this is an important contribution to stabilizing our economy and stabilizing democracy. We have a free trade with now with Europe, we have free trade with Turkey, we have free trade with the ex-Soviet Union republics, and when we are talking about Georgia, this is a significant step. Security issues are, of course, a serious problem for stabilizing democratic process in Georgia. We know what is happening in Ukraine, and what is happening in Ukraine has been happening in Georgia not only in 2008, but basically in 90s as well, and we could see the hybrid war happening in Georgia in 90s. Occupation of Georgian territories, now occupation of Crimea, of annexation of Crimea and occupation of eastern Ukraine is becoming more tense, and it is complicating security environment naturally, and this is a serious problem for stabilizing democracy in Georgia. Another factor which could be considered as positive is our last year's achievement. Also, it's an agreement. It's a special package that we received from NATO, making it more active, having NATO programs in Georgia, having a NATO package being unfolded in Georgia very actively, having the train and evaluation program being unfolded in Georgia, and having more NATO in Georgia and more Georgia in NATO is a positive factor for developing Georgian democracy and stabilizing the state. Also, the ongoing democratic process. I think that we have a serious positive dynamics and serious positive agenda in this respect. We have had 3 free elections. We achieved one of the main things that democracy should achieve internally. We have achieved belief of citizens that the governments could be changed through elections. This was a great achievement because now citizens believe that they can change one government with another. They might not like any of the governments, but they know that they can influence and their voice matters. And this is an important achievement in stabilizing our society and in stabilizing our democratic process. We have made media much more freer, it's much more open, public debate is much more open, society is debating very actively about some of the main political issues, and this is very significant. But also, of course, when we are talking about building and developing a democratic state, it's a huge challenge to stabilize democracy in a country whose territories, whose basically borders are violated. And this is, of course, is a very negative component for stabilized, democratic, developed Georgia. In this respect, I think that we are facing a serious challenge, and we have been facing a serious challenge last year when we had, at the end of the year, Russian Federation has signed the agreement with the so-called Abkhazian government, and now they've signed the agreement with the so-called Ossetian government, which basically accelerated the level of occupation to the level of annexation of our territories. And this naturally creates problems and threats in our society. Of course, we have a huge number of refugees. 10% of Georgians are refugees in their own country, and of course this factor is also a problematic factor for building a stable society with stable democratic systems and values. We have one more factor that is becoming more active. This is a soft power of Russian Federation that is basically challenging Western choice of our society. I should state that Georgian society's Western choice has been very firm and has gone through lots of challenges that took maybe lives of hundreds of people and that have taken welfare of tens of hundreds of people. But still we are firm on our choice. But we see that Russian soft power is becoming more and more active. And not only in Georgia, naturally this happens all around the world. The Russian propaganda is active all around the world and naturally in Georgia as well. So, in this environment that I have tried to describe very briefly, what do we have? We have economic opportunities which are based on some firm grounds of partnering with Europe, partnering with our regional cooperation, but have serious threats economically as well because we have security problems being accelerated to economic problems in the region, and we have seen that we had serious crisis right now when we have devaluation of our currency, and it is strongly dependent on the environment around us in Russia and Ukraine. So there are opportunities, but there are also threats. Their growing democratic process is also creating opportunities for all voices to speak out, including some of the voices that are not for, let's say, very determined pro-Western choice of our country and our society. And this is also a part of democratic process. We have a political system where we have to build strong institutions, strong state institutions, as well as strong public institutions, and this is a challenge. And in this respect, I would like to underline that Georgian democracy cannot succeed if we don't have strong political parties, very stable political parties, 3 or 4 maybe, which are stable in the parliament, and we know that they will be there. There will be different percentages with which they will be coming and going and forming different alliances, but we have to have stable political parties to stabilize democratic process in Georgia. We have a challenge of strengthening even more our civil society and public institutions. And of course, the main threat is to maintain ourselves in this very complicated region, to maintain our national security and stability. And of course, it is challenged by all the factors that I've described above. I tried to sort of give you a brief overview of where we are. I think that we'll have more opportunities to be discussed in the questions and answers section. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Well, in the given time of 5 minutes, I'll try to address 3 points about the potential of democracy in Georgian society, about the main obstacles of building a sustainable democracy, and about the approach we have now in Georgia, we meaning the new government which is responsible about the country since 2012. About the potential, after listening this analysis, what was happening about democracy during the course of history and during the last 40 years and so on, for us, Georgians, these last 40 years were instrumental. Why? Not because of the events in Portuguese, but because of the Helsinki process, which started almost in the same time. And we all know that that process generated very important processes in this country. When the people, dissidents, emerged as the people who started penetrating democratic ideas in the society, which was in stagnation in Brezhnev era. And many political leaders who later on led the country to the change, a dramatic change, started their political activity or thinking in those days, including the founders of the party I belong, the Republican Party, which was founded in those years, 1978. others formed different groups and so on. And that was the important ingredient of the process which we observed then in late 80s, when after perestroika, this country emerged as, well, during the perestroika years, this country emerged as one of the champions of fight against Soviet rule, fight against Soviet empire, and fight for joining the democratic world. This was a very important process which we observed, but would those leaders of different political groups and dissidents would be able to do that without having potential in the society? Probably no. And we need to underline very important feature, characteristics of our society, of our people. Georgians are very individualistic people. They want to be champions. Not only political leaders are fighting for the very few chairs in political leadership, but everything Georgian wants to be best. And those of you who know better the culture of Georgia, the last point is the competition who is making best homemade wine. And if you tell somebody that no, probably your wine is not as good as the other one, well, that's the huge humiliation of the people. So there could be number of things brought in the discussion which demonstrate that, well, this country, this society cannot tolerate something different than democracy, than free competition, than the ability to kind of make your own case and to be you, not something which others want you to be. Therefore, authoritarian rule, which, yeah, in many countries lasted or is still the case for decades, probably in this country has life expectation of 2, 3 years, 4 years, not more. And it has been demonstrated a couple of times during the last 25 years. So what I want to say, and because of time constraint, I cannot elaborate more, there is huge potential and spirit of the democratic lifestyle. And this is probably most natural for the society. But then we see that we have some obstacles. And we failed several times. At the beginning of 90s, we believed that when we said no to communist regime, well, democracy would arrive. That would be so easy. Because, yeah, now we all wanted freedom, and there were many parties, more parties than we have now in political scene. But it did not work. Then there were several waves of this kind of transformation and expectations and hopes. Last failure being the Rose Revolution, which generated huge enthusiasm, and most of the people I see in this room, Georgians, were together in those days and trying to achieve something, including all of us Georgians here, in different capacity. But then some things happened, and then we are now in all different sides, and we are sometimes fighting, and then so. Why is that? Why we failed to stay together when we were so close to each other? Probably because we failed to disassociate our personality from the public roles we are having. To make sure that, well, when I am looking to my old friend, Mr. Giorgi Margvelashvili, I am looking now to the president of the country. And no matter how I like him or dislike him or agree or disagree on the personal level, I need to agree with this fact that he's the president, and I'm talking with the president. And he is the president. And Mr. George Baramidze, with whom I have even longer history of being together and fighting together, I need to agree that he is vice speaker of the parliament and he is member of the parliament. And no matter how much I disagree to him or I have many questions about his decisions in the past and so on, yes, we need to somehow work together. I need to listen to him, and I need to take into account his arguments and sometimes agree as well, and that's not shame. That's why I say that, yeah, on this issue he's right. So this goes to political culture issue, this goes to some temperament or many other things, and I find this as main obstacle, because we fail to consolidate our potential. We fail to institutionalize our democratic potential. We fail sometimes to have free and fair competition between political parties. On the other hand, we succeed becoming kind of enemies on the second day after we disagree on some issue, on policy issue or on a value issue or something like that. So that's major obstacle which we need to overcome, and there are many tools how it should be done and so on, and how to consolidate democratic forces in this country, how to make sure that we can live together even when we disagree to each other and move forward. And third point I wanted to make is the approach of the new political leadership we have now in this country. Some years ago, there was huge debate, discussion inside the country what was going on, because there were, well, according to our colleagues from now opposition, then ruling party, there was a great process of building Georgian state. And therefore, certain shortcomings, mistakes, some other problems, they were justified with this very noble and very needed process, building the state. But the problem, I believe, was that the process of building the state and process of building the authority or the system of authority, state authority, were mixed. And probably in most cases we had we were observing the process of building state authority and the system of authority, how to govern the country and how to make it effective, then building a state. Because building a state is much more complex process than building effective authority. And that's the case, that's true that previous government was much more effective than we are now. They succeeded in building effective system of authority, state authority. Even when Mr. President mentioned the word effectiveness, the microphone failed today. That's quite symbolic. So our government are less effective. Why? Why? I believe because we try to build the state. And if you want to build the state, you need to agree that institutions must be developed. And we should better allow judges make mistakes than try to guide them every time and make sure that they are not making mistakes. Therefore, they are effective, they are making fast decisions which are in the line of the policy of the government, and everything moves faster. We better allow local governments be not well prepared at the moment for dealing with their jobs, and allow people to elect their own mayors, which we did during the last local elections. And yeah, they are not as effective as those who were appointed a few years ago and who were watched from the center and who were guided from the center. And yeah, they were able to solve some problems faster. But if we do not allow local people to be free and to make sometimes mistake as well, they will never learn how to govern with for their village and so on. Again, I will not continue more. This is our approach, that if we want to build state, we need to strengthen the institutions, and we need to allow that president is the president, and he has his mind. And sometimes we disagree, and sometimes he will put veto on the law which the parliament adopts, which was unthinkable previously. If during the previous system, one minister would say something differently, or one institution would act differently than the state hierarchy worked, that was the start of the end. because the monolithic structure of the governance would be just destroyed. I'm not saying that this approach is perfect. Of course, we have problems, and we need to improve in terms of democracy, in terms of rule of law, in terms of transparency, but this is the approach. And we better spend more time on building real state and state institutions than being too much focused on today's needs, that we need to build this road or we need to, I don't know, deliver this service to the people, no matter what is the cost in terms of democratic development. So this is the challenge, and I believe we will be successful because we have learned a lot of things from our past. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, if you'd like to come to Washington and share your views on legislative-executive cooperation and cooperation across party lines with some of our own politicians, I think Americans would be delighted. Now, third, we'll hear from Mr. Irakli Alasania, who's the leader of the Free Democrats.
Thank you. Well, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, David, Gia, it's an honor and pleasure to be with you on the same panel. Well, the Free Democrats, the party that I represent, is not a political dinosaur like Republican parties, so we cannot tell the stories that occurred in the late 80s or 90s, but what I can assure you of is that for the past 7 to 8 years that we've been actively participating in politics, I do agree that the most Georgian politicians really want to be a champions individually. And I mean, there's no exception, I think, on this panel as well. But at the same time, what we need to learn is how we can all be winners as a team. And this is why, of course, the 3 priorities I want to emphasize are, first, of course, that we have to really see the fundamental human rights as a kind of pillar and the main pillar of the democratic, liberal democratic society. The second, of course, is government that is effective, the government that is clean, and third, of course, the liberal democracy that can survive, defend itself from external and internal threats. So first, I will begin with the human rights and democracy. I mean, we had quite a lot of different governments since the regaining of the independence, and some of them were weak in effectiveness and strength, but democratic. Some of them were more effective, but lacked the democratic credentials, like the government before this. And then we have now the government that is, from my perspective, is more democratic, but the fundamental democratic values are not fully upheld. But at the same time, we lost the effectiveness that the government had before this government. So I think the main challenge for us only can be actually met and addressed if we're going to put more emphasis, as the chairman said, on the institutions. The institutions and rule of law, this is something that cannot be put on the shelf. Some of the political leaders have made that choices. They were saying that first we need to build a state that is strong, that is effective, and the human right and democracy will wait, and it failed. I believe that there are the tendencies with the same government doing the same, this government doing the same. So this is why, by building democracy, by building and respecting the human rights, civil society has to have a bigger say than ever. So this is why I would emphasize in this regard the civil activity and the NGO community's activities. They will check the government, they will check the branches of the government, how they are performing and how they are accountable to the people. The second, of course, as I mentioned, is the government that is clean. And by what I mean clean is this has to be a transparent way of governing. What we have today is a hybrid. It's a government that is actually run by the informal vertical. This is most, I think, would say fundamental problem for today's democratic development in Georgia, which can be fixed. It can be fixed. If it's not going to fix before the next election, I believe the Georgian people will fix it. But I would like the government to be more effective. I would like the government run the countries by the institutions, by the responsible ministries and prime ministers, rather than the people from behind the scene. The third, of course, the security. Security means for me and for the most of the Georgians that the environment where can develop their own respective tools, be part of the economic and the country's overall growth, but it can only be achieved if we, as a liberal democracy, can be defending ourselves from the external threats. We have two main, clear and present, so to say, danger that we face. First, of course, is the Islamic extremism that is threatening the whole region from the south. And of course, major, I would say, more clear and present danger is, of course, imperial extremism that we are facing from the north, from Russian Federation. This is why Georgia, quite logically, opted to be belonging towards the collective defense and security organizations such as NATO. We also are on the right path to the European integration, and it means not only political and economic, but also security-wise our ties will strengthen and are already strengthening with the European Union. We're part of not only the NATO operations, but also EU security and defense policy operations. And of course, these challenges that we are facing is a major threat for Georgia's overall development, and the potential that the previous speakers were talking only can be used fully if there's going to be a basic national consensus about what are the national goals. I was tremendously happy to hear the exit polls, actually not exit, but opinion polls that were out a few days ago. I was in the European Parliament actually meeting with the colleagues, and I was tremendously supported by the polls, ratings about the Georgia's overall sentiments towards the EU and NATO. It means that the Georgian society truly believes that their choice is right, their choice is in the right place, and myself and our party that were very kind of cautious about and also worried about the effect of the Russian propaganda in Georgia by effectively using and trying to use the soft power tools, supporting NGOs and political organizations, have not had that much effect on Georgian public opinion. And this is very important for us to understand, that public choice lies within the European values, supporting democracy, supporting the human rights, building the liberal democracy that will be secure in a Europe which is going to be whole and free. Now, on the other hand, internally, those folks who are sitting here, except David, but David is also had a great knowledge of Georgian politics, we should be communicating more often with each other. And this is not the problem of hearing each other, it's a problem of understanding more and more each other. So this is why I think these kind of gatherings with the friends from abroad and inside the country, we should understand that we only going to be winners if we're going to stick together, if we're going to have the basic national understanding about which are the goals domestically and foreign policy-wise. So again, thank you very much, and I'm going to stop here. Probably I'm going to give more time to others to make their statements, and then we're going to have a question and answer. Thanks.
Thank you for those very clear and concise remarks. And now we go to Mr. Baramidze, the Vice Speaker of the Parliament.
Thank you, Dr. Diamond, and thank you for organizers for giving us opportunity to have such a wonderful chance for mental exercise, talking about the academic subjects as well as political acute issues. Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, Irakli, dear colleagues, it's a really pleasure for me to be together with you at this panel. And I confess I found really very interesting to have this chance to talk about the issues that is so important for our country. And from the very beginning, I would like to say that I have enormous respect to all of you, individually as well as representatives of those institutions that David was talking about. In fact, our legacy of our government is to strengthen and build these institutions. I don't know why David was avoiding the term of institutions, but using the term of authority. But these were the authority, the strong institutions, and I think nobody can deny the fact that Georgia was almost a failed state. And when we talk about prosperity, freedom, and security, I think what we need is a right balance, right kind of mixture of everything together. And when we've got this composition, I think society, of course with many other elements, society can develop harmoniously in a secure environment which provides people chance to express themselves freely. We had a country when, even when we had such a great nation that everyone is individualist and they want to be champion, they couldn't express themselves because they could be killed by the criminals, or they couldn't really address the government and influence government because it was so corrupt that it was impossible to somehow democratically influence this government. And there was a fundamental problems that we had to solve. But certainly, I would like to use the phrase of the Benjamin Franklin: those who surrender freedom for security will not have, nor do they deserve, neither one. Certainly. And there is no doubt about this, but without security, and here I would like to agree with Dr. Diamond, without proper governance, we have no chance to hope that our freedom and democracy will be strengthened, especially in the environment when we have such a challenging factors from North Russian Federation, which is an occupier and which recently annexed practically our territories, and when we have not only hard power, as it was mentioned here, but also which use the so-called soft power against our, I would call, hybrid democracy. Why hybrid democracy? Because from one hand, I would agree with what David and Mr. President have said, that there are more vibrant discussion in Parliament, though we have sometimes fist fighting, but this Parliament probably is more vibrant and we are discussing things and maybe one would consider press more free. But from the other hand, is it democracy which is run by a person who has no authority, no responsibility at all? Is it a step forward when the whole country run by informal person, when practically his influence is much stronger than all of us here? And I don't want to insult anybody, and we know that this is true. So we all know that democracy is built based on rule of law, but also on traditions, and traditions being created by the precedents. Is it normal after democratic elections to have a precedent when the government, which was accepted by defeated political party, puts practically all the leaders of the previous government in jail, and some of them in pretrial detention, in violation of the Constitution? Some of them goes another second term of the 9 months pretrial detention for not violent, let's say, crime that never been proved by the court. So we all have to agree that we should have a system when strong political parties that are representing our society, representing interests of our society, don't afraid to lose. We've created a system which was effective, and we consider it as our victory when we've been defeated. Maybe it sounds a bit weird, but we are proud of our achievements, including that we've been defeated in the democratic way, and when we, as a first ever political party, recognized the results of elections and congratulated the winners. And plus, in spite of declared goal of the de facto ruler to eliminate us, we survived. And Irakli mentioned opinion polls. It looks like people thinking more thoroughly about whom to support, and the support toward the progressive parties, including, first of all, my party, is growing. So therefore, let's indeed stick together, because we are all part of this society. We need each other. We need not to be enemies, but to be opponents, in which process we will build definitely stronger democracy, and will not allow the Russia use the objective weaknesses of democracy, which every democracy has. But they, having this authoritarian, very sometimes effective government, will continue to use our disagreements and differences. We have to understand that we don't need to support extremism in this country, which is yet another serious threat alongside of Russian threat and extremism, not only Islamic extremism, but so-called extremism of the democracy doubles that are advocating for in the worlds for democracy, but have nothing in their mind in terms of really building democracy and trying to put one part of the society against another. So therefore, it's in our interest to stick together and help this society to develop. It's our goal to be good leaders in order to help free people that are based for the real freedom and real democracy to show their strengths and to materialize their potential. Thank you very much.
Speaker. And our final speaker is David Kramer.
Larry, thank you very much, and my thanks to the sponsors of the conference for inviting me. I flew in just this morning from Washington, so forgive me if I fall asleep while I'm speaking. Excellent, not too hard. As I look at this panel, very distinguished Georgian officials, I'm reminded of a line that Admiral James Stockdale used in a vice presidential debate in the United States, I think it was 1992, in which he said, "Who am I and what am I doing here?" And I look down this row and I wonder the same thing. So let me tell you who I am and what I'm doing here. First, I come, even though the institute I work for, the McCain Institute, is separate, it obviously is connected to the McCain family, and Senator McCain conveys his best regards to everyone and to Georgia, the country. But I'm also here to speak rather candidly and bluntly about some of the challenges you face and that the region faces. One of the best compliments, at least I think it was a compliment, that was paid to me after serving 8 years in the State Department was that even when I was a diplomat, I wasn't very diplomatic. And so I'm going to try to live up to that here today. Quite simply, Georgia cannot afford to stray from the path of democracy. We saw from the Bush administration, in which I served all 8 years, that there was an over-personalization of the relationship between President Bush and President Saakashvili. It led, I would argue, to looking the other way when Georgia strayed from the Democratic path. That was a mistake in the Bush administration. The mistake of the Obama administration, I would argue, is there's no personalization of the relationship at all. We've gone from one extreme to the other, where the United States, because of other demands on its time, quite frankly, is not paying as much attention as I would argue it should here in Georgia, the Caucasus, or the region more broadly, except, of course, now with Ukraine and the crisis involving Russia. The administration, from the outset, with the announcement of the reset, was focused on its relationship with Moscow. And so we have to find the happy medium between the over-personalization of the Bush policy to, quite frankly, and my colleagues from the embassy might disagree, the neglect of the Obama administration. And Georgia can help with that by making sure it becomes a model for democracy, a paragon of democracy, and that it doesn't stray from that path. There's nothing you can do about the neighborhood in which you live. Geography is geography. But you can control events here in your country while recognizing you have a significant neighbor that is trying to screw up things here, not least through invading, as it did in 2008. Russia, under President Putin, is hell-bent on blocking efforts by Georgia, by Moldova, by Ukraine, to integrate more closely into Euro-Atlantic institutions. So everything you try to do that's positive, Russia will try to undo it. You have to realize and recognize that fact. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. Other countries in the region, Azerbaijan, the worst human rights situation in the region, I would argue. I've actually written that it's time for sanctions against the Aliyev regime because of the human rights abuses. There are twice as many political prisoners in Azerbaijan as there are in Belarus and Russia combined, and the US has sanctions against the Lukashenko regime and through the Magnitsky legislation against the Putin regime for human rights abuses. I think it's time to do that in the case of the Aliyev regime. Armenia is too beholden to Russia, sadly, and is dependent on that and pressured into abandoning its path with the EU and moving toward the Eurasian Union. We see Moldova with a new government struggling after elections to stay on a positive path with Western institutions, Russia ratcheting up the pressure there as well. And of course, there's Ukraine, and I will come back to that in my last words. You need to double down on your efforts to deepen the roots of democracy, respect for human rights, so that countries in Europe or my own country don't say, there goes Georgia. We have enough problems to deal with. We have Iran, we have the Islamic State, we have Russia, Ukraine. If Georgia isn't going to get its act together, we have other things to keep us busy. Don't give us that excuse. Stay on the right track. What does that mean? It means improving, for example, the conditions of prisons. When I came here in 2008, when I was in the State Department, this was one of the top priorities then. Of course, fixing the problems from November 2007 was also high on the list. It means stressing the importance of independent and diverse media to make sure that they are not used for political purposes and political gain. It means a credible judicial process where the prosecutor's office and others are not used to carry out vendettas and revenge. It means being aware of the scope and scale of investigations and arrests and prosecutions, detentions, pretrial and otherwise, because that will undermine the credibility of the process. There is a fine balance between accountability and making sure people from previous governments are held to account and using the judicial process to even political scores. And I would argue when I was at Freedom House, we believed that there was too much on the political scorekeeping and not enough on maintaining that right balance. It means understanding the importance of opposition parties and making sure that people in the opposition are not fearful that the criticism of the government may wind up having them in prison or under investigation. It means good elections, and you've had those. And these shouldn't be taken for granted in a region where elections are largely fixed and rigged before they're even held. Transfers of power, peaceful transfers of power are extremely important. But let's also be clear that elections are not the only element of democracy, as Larry and Steve Krasner can address much better than I. It means a vibrant civil society, and that is one thing I've always found in Georgia. It does not lack for a strong civil society. If you don't want to be overlooked, if you don't want to be forgotten by the West, including by my own country, then become a democratic model. Stress the importance of legitimate political leadership, of accountability, of rule of law, not by law. Separation of powers, checks and balances. All of these things are critical ingredients to make sure you stay on the right path despite the odds, despite the pressure from outside. Lastly, on Ukraine, and I apologize for going over, there is no bigger crisis that we face than Russia's invasion and ongoing aggression against Ukraine. If we don't get this right, it is going to redound to Georgia's detriment. I agree with Larry in his comments earlier that we have not done enough to help Ukraine defend itself. I support and applaud the sanctions that have been imposed against Russia, but they are not enough. They are not in a policy in and of themselves. We have to do much more to support Ukraine. We didn't do enough, and I worked in the Bush administration all 8 years in 2008 to help Georgia. I'm not holding up the response of my government and the West in general of 2008 and say that was the model, and now the response to Ukraine is the bad model. We didn't do enough. We didn't learn enough from 2008, and here we are again facing an even worse challenge, I would say, in Ukraine for now over a year. Russia is a threat to its neighbors. It's a threat to its own people. It's a threat to the West, and we in the West have to come to grips with that in a much more coherent, sustainable fashion. We have to help the countries on the border be in a better position to defend themselves. And we have to be a better, stronger ally and friend to all of Russia's neighbors, consistent with our principles, which means we shouldn't look at relations with any country in this region through a Russia prism. We should look at it based on its own merits and insist that every country, including this one, respect democratic standards and human rights. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'm just going to pose one question that I'd like each of you to answer briefly if you can, engage one another if you wish, and then we'll open it up to the audience. We have until 11:30 when we're going to have a coffee break. So we've talked about a lot of the challenges that need to happen in Georgia. I'm wondering if we could start with you, Mr. President, and this is a question I'm sure that will arise again in the next panel that my colleague Steve Krasner, Professor of Political Science at Stanford, will chair. But what would you like to see from the United States and Europe in terms of the kind of security and partnership side of this challenge, either for Georgia or for the region more broadly? Mr. President.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief again. I think the situation is pretty clear right now on security issues. Unfortunately, it's very clear. Russia has been very explicit and blunt in stating its geopolitical vision. and very outspoken, actually. What they say is that the ex-Soviet Union is the backyard, and that there is an area of privileged interest zones where they can decide issues through military means. They've said it, they've done it. They've done it many times. What we have got as a response from our friends and allies is support, and I want to thank our partners who have stopped bloodshed in 2008. But did we see a more consistent policy towards overcoming the problems that were created, territorial problems in Georgia? No. Of course, we have seen a very firm non-recognition policy, and I want to thank our partners again. But we have not overcome those issues and those problems, the occupation problem, and we have received another problem in 2014 in Ukraine. Maybe because the world was not consolidated with dealing with the occupation of 2008. So Russia talks very openly, and they state their goals openly, and frankly, when we see any kind of potential problem emerging, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Ukraine, whether those are other states of ex-Soviet Republic, we see very effective, efficient, and very quick engagement of Russian Federation in, let's say, solving those issues with military formats. So what do we see from our partners? We see that they are not consolidated and they are not decided, and they condemn aggression, but we don't see very active response to overall policy of privileged interest zones and an acceptance of this policy. What would we like to see? A more active engagement, a more active participation, and more timely engagement of Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, the nations that have taken the pro-Western choice into European and Euro-Atlantic structures. Of course, we do understand that there is a clear message that, okay, we cannot engage in military actions, whether it's Ukraine or whether this was Georgia. I understand that argument. But before military actions start, you have to be there, and you have to be there more actively and more rapidly. And I don't think that this is happening in the enough speed that it could be happening, taken into consideration the environment and the security environment that we are living in. So European and Euro-Atlantic integration is very high on Georgia's agenda, and we are doing our best in both directions, and we are looking for more speedily engagement of our country as well as of the other countries of the Eastern Partnership, the champion countries of Eastern Partnership, into European and Euro-Atlantic structures. In this case, I think we will deal. This will be a response to aggressiveness that we are seeing in the region. I'll try to be brief.
Very good. We're going to go in the same order, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Well, I would underline three important areas where the U.S. could help Georgia more and better in order to make sure that Georgia is able to perform its role in security of the region and being a strategic partner of the U.S. First, it's about the economy. We all remember what happened in Georgia after August 2008 war. Yes, the military operations were stopped, but Georgia could be defeated in the other front, that was economy. And if there was no support from the US and the European Union, and a couple of $1 billion were not committed to help the country, then yeah, Russia would just continue achieving and seeing that its goal was achieved. Now Georgia is not affected directly militarily. However, the events in Ukraine are affecting our economy a lot. We support the sanctions against Russia. and we believe they could be tougher and more effective. But the ultimate objective of those sanctions is to weaken Russian economy. And this is going to have impact on Georgian economy. And not only on Georgian economy, on Moldovan economy, on other countries' economy. And that's just more than clear. Therefore, I believe together with the package of sanctions against Russia, there must be a package of help to Georgia and other strategic partners in the region. And Ukraine here stands alone because of its situation. I'm not talking about Ukraine help. It's, of course, number one priority for the US and others. But Moldova, Georgia, in terms of helping our economies, must not be forgotten. And that's very, very urgent need if we want to punish the aggressor and help the strategic partners and direct or indirect victims of aggression. Second, in the situation when we all see that the process of collective decision-making within the NATO is complex, slower than we wanted to see, together with more efforts for convincing the countries who are more skeptical about timing of Georgia's accession to NATO, I believe the US should be more active in bilateral relations with Georgia in military, defense, and security areas, whatever it takes. There's a huge package of possible assistance on the bilateral level, because the increased security of this country could be achieved through this way as well. And again, we have example of August 2008. It was US military ships who arrived in Batumi seaport, and we know all the story. What really made the change in this and broke the balance there. And the third area, this is kind of something immediate one, which we would be glad to see that it is happening. We are heading towards Riga Eastern Partnership Summit, where some important decisions should be made. And I believe the US government should use all its influence or diplomacy skills or whatever to convince our European countries, partners again, that this is not only about the European Union and Georgia. This is not only about visa liberalization and possible free travel of Georgians to Europe. This is much more than that. In these current circumstances, when we know the war in Ukraine started exactly about this issue, and this is exactly the issue Russia is going to be acting again. And we see the Russian hand in certain things, in the actions of certain political forces across Europe, when they try to kind of slow down the process of integration, decrease the meaning of the signature and the association agreement, decrease the speed of delivering concrete positive things to Georgian people, why European integration matters and so on. And I believe this kind of activity and this kind of discussion with the friends, underlining that success of the Riga Eastern Partnership Summit, delivering decisions which are favorable for Georgia, Moldova, and others, should be seen from the larger context than technical reports about fulfilling certain homework and other things, which of course we have to do, and I believe we are doing our best. But this could be some immediate help if it was possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Alasania, you're not only the leader of opposition, but you're also a former Minister of Defense. Right. So if you want to get into further detail here, please feel free to do so.
Sure. Well, I can't help but saying it's very good to be out of the government time to time, because you have a freedom of speaking your mind. So this is, I think, my turn now to be as blunt as I can get, as David just was with us a few minutes ago. Well, first of all, of course, if you don't have certain amount of security, and if you're not able and capable of defending your country, there's actually fruitless talking about economic security or security of your own people. So this is why I think that number one priority will be and should be for us to increase our own self-defense capabilities. This was the part of my job while I was a defense minister with vis-a-vis the partners and first and foremost with the United States, which is the best and strongest friend that we have, Georgia has. But at the same time, I would say that the decisions that were talked about and the self-defensive capabilities that Georgia was longing to get, meanwhile everybody on the mid-level and also the levels of the decision makers within the structures agreed it was stuck and still is stuck in the White House. So I do believe that the priority for us to work with the United States should be to authorize to Georgia and, well, the Ukraine as well, to have the lethal self-defensive capabilities. This is number one priority for our country. Because we remember in 2008, and I was in the meeting, by the way, when the Condi Rice told President Saakashvili that if you guys are going to give pretext to Russians to come in, you should know we're not going to be here. You should know NATO will not be here. Since then, we all learned in a hard way that the only thing we can depend is ourselves. And this is why the Georgia has tremendously progressed since then on the defense side. We have more than 12,000 troops that were trained through the vigorous NATO and US training. And we've been tested in a combat on the battlefield with the United States and NATO countries. Actually, we are named since the World Summit as the most interoperable non-NATO country member. This is why I think if we can be trusted with the weapons on the battlefields of Afghanistan and Iraq, what's wrong with us having the self-defensive weapons to defend our freedom and democracy? So I think the number one priority for United States and Georgian relationship on the security and defense is the providing Georgians with the lethal self-defensive capabilities to drive up the cost to Russians if they're going to feel that now it's time for them to come in again. And I think they will look and think twice. If we're going to have reliable and modern air defense and anti-tank capabilities, they will think twice before coming in. So this is number one. Of course, I will sign up for the most of the things that was talked by the panelists about supporting us in the next Riga summit, which is mainly European affair, but the United States has its own say. And of course, visa liberalization is something very tangible that could be given to Georgian public to meet their expectations. As I mentioned, 86% of Georgians are hoping that and are favoring of becoming the members of the European structures and European Union in general at the end. So I think the diplomatic machinery that the United States has to be put in a full use. Of course, I can only testify that in these 2 years that I've been a minister and before, as I've dealt with the United States, this relationship has grown stronger and stronger by each administration. It was made strategic by the Saakashvili's government by signing the strategic partnership. Now and then we, of course, build on that and we get more stronger ties on the defense, security, and intelligence side, but it is just not enough. We have to get the weapons in case we're going to be needing to defend our freedom and democracy to use it. Thank you.
Clear, concise, and forceful. Okay, next we turn to the Deputy Speaker, Mr. Baramidze.
Yeah, as yet another former defense minister and minister responsible for NATO integration, I would like to fully subscribe what my colleagues have said. But first of all, I would like to say before kind of presenting my points how enormously we appreciate what United States already have done for our country. We have to say bluntly, without United States vital support, we would not be able to sit here and talk about Georgia's democracy or the security or whatever somebody else like with the names of the oath will be sitting here and talking about how consolidate their like the grip of the power over the Georgia. So Georgia wouldn't be free. put it shortly. I have 7 points. First of all, like general point, what we need of United States is a strong leadership and coordinated policies, thoroughly put next to each other and directed to the goal to strengthen our relationship, strengthen ally of United States as a model of democracy as well, and as a, if we wish, stronghold as far as military presence is concerned. And the country that has a strategic importance and can serve really very important role in the situation when the East and the Far East becomes more and more important for the interests of United States. Third point, help and criticism, adequate criticism in building our democracy. This is very much needed. Fourth point, to continue efforts to help Georgia withstand Russian soft power. We have enormous influence of the Russian state-controlled media and grown like mushrooms so-called NGOs, partly also kind of morally supported by the current government that are advocating for Eurasian Union and also are supporting extremism and supporting violence against the minorities. Second, spend sufficient, and it was mentioned, but I would put it in my words, but unfortunately I don't know why NATO was not mentioned, spend sufficient diplomatic resources to advance Georgia's NATO membership. This is what matters the most at this moment. We all know that it's not fair that Georgia is not given yet still the map. And we all know that everybody, sorry to say, practically lying, saying that there is no third party that prevents the candidate countries entering NATO. This is lie. Because we all know, if not Russia's fierce resistance, Georgia would have been already be a member of NATO. So we have to face truth and overcome this serious problem. I'm not saying that we have to ignore this and the countries that are member of NATO have their own interests, but US can spend more diplomatic resources to convince these countries that it's better to have Georgia in rather than keep it out, and making Russia yet another time try to get Georgia back on its orbit of the exclusive influence. So once Georgia will be in, these attempts by Russia will be significantly down, as it happened in case of Baltic states. Now we are like Western communities testing Russia, how much he can do, something against Georgia again and again, and if Georgia will not fail, okay, then we can think. But it's a dangerous game. It's much more dangerous to keep Georgia out of NATO than get Georgia in under the umbrella. It's much more risky to keep Georgia out. Another thing, also practical thing, Irakli mentioned our strategic partnership chapter, and it's I would say, kind of waste of time and the big loss and really unforgivable mistake of this government not to resume very actively talk with the United States about free trade agreement. Georgia is the rarest country that US president gave the kind of promise to start negotiations on free trade agreement. And I think it's kind of crime not to use this opportunity, at least to engage in this dialogue. And we have now almost 3 years done nothing. Nobody even have mentioned about this. And 2 more points. I'm talking about the realistic things. Millennium Corporation's money must be allocated for those US investors that will be willing to invest in this country as a kind of the insurance. It's like OPIC type of thing. A special dedicated fund for those who will invest in Georgia to stimulate these US investors to come and invest. And finally, I'll be more specific. Irakli talked about this. Air defense capability for Georgia. This is vital. This is, I think, number one, alongside of other defense capabilities, which enables Georgia to give such a response to Russia or to anybody that will make them think twice before attacking. Thank you.
David, any further thoughts or reactions?
Just very quickly, here in Tbilisi you have excellent representation from the United States, from the EU, from NATO, but you need higher level support among Western leaders. And for my country, we need to pivot back to Europe. The notion of a pivot to Asia, to pivot to something, you have to pivot away from something. And so the notion of a pivot, I think, was a mistake, because it sent a signal, perhaps interpreted most clearly in Moscow, that we weren't watching anymore, that we weren't paying attention. So from my president to the German chancellor to other leaders in the West, you need to feel more support at the highest levels. But you will not get that if your country is viewed as going in the wrong direction, or if you're having problems. It is too easy for us to just look the other way. Don't let us do that. Thank you.
I'm going to take just, please be very brief, maybe about 3 questions. So, okay, we'll start with you. And be very brief. I'll collect them and I'll let the panelists reply as they see fit. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Giorgi. I'm an MP with UNM, the opposition. I have a very quick comment and question to the speaker. I think there is a great term in democratization theory to describe what is happening to Georgia right now, and that term is backsliding of democracy. And there are 3 symptoms for that. The fact that almost all opposition leaders are in jail or under prosecution, and Mr. Kramer is well aware that the number of political prisoners that Belarusian opposition regards as such is 3, and here we regard 7 people as political prisoners. The second symptom is the conceptual questioning of the right of the main opposition party to exist, and this is routinely done by Prime Minister or indeed the decision maker of the government, Mr. Ivanishvili. And the third sign is the empowerment of what Ivan Krastev calls democracy's doubles, both inside the government and outside. Mr. Baramidze said that precedents are very important for young democracies, indeed, more than laws. And right now the precedent that Georgia is producing is that when you concede power in a democratic way, and if you want to build democracy, you should lose one day, you go to jail. I don't think this is the precedent Georgia or Georgia's friends want Georgia to be producing. And the question to Mr. Speaker is this. You said that you support sanctions against Russia. Is that the position of the Georgian government? Because last time the government officials commented on that question, the position was the opposite. The Prime Minister, in his November 27 Financial Times interview, opposed arming Ukraine. Foreign Minister last time made comment, said that sanctions are not the way. And in Parliament, 3 times you voted down any form of endorsement of these sanctions. Thank you.
Thank you, David Archiashvili, also from the Georgian Parliament, from opposition party. Mr. Kramer mentioned that we cannot escape from geography, and I would add that we also cannot escape from this revisionist vision of Russian political elite, so it will stay for a while at least. So what is the most important, whether our internal national fabric, polity, is ready to withstand. And here, like my colleague, I see the extremely confrontational pattern we have in internal politics, which sometimes make me think that maybe it's just a continuation of the Soviet political pattern where the repressions and corruption were coming in interchangeable waves, and maybe we are just prison of our past. But that for some from our opponent camp, it's just a never-ending restoration of justice. For others, for us, it's just a political retribution, retaliation. So the question is, what can international community do with that? Otherwise, we stay as a very fragile, not prepared polity to withstand external challenges. There are critical statements, reports from OSCE, ODIHR, from European Parliament, from the State Department, but so far this process continues.
Okay, the last question from this woman here. Please stand up and someone will give you a mic. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Asmin Grigoryan. I am from Armenia, from Analytical Center on Globalization and Regional Cooperation. Regarding the state institutions, I agree that full control of the state institutions is not that democratic, but on the other hand, allowing, for example, the judges to make many mistakes may bring to a failure of checks and balances mechanism or make it weaker. So how is Georgia going to find the balance between the full control and giving the freedom? And my second question is more related to the situation in Armenia. Armenia, unfortunately, went towards the Eurasian Economic Union, and as His Excellency Mr. President said, the main achievement of Georgia is the ratification of the association agreement. So my question is, could you tell more about successes exactly of the ratification? This will allow us to pressure our government and to show that the association agreement is beneficial. Thank you.
Any of these questions or anything else that's been said on the panel, if you could just take a minute or two to respond however you'd like. Mr. President?
I'll respond to the last question from our Armenian friend. First of all, I think that with the association agreement, Georgia has gone a very positive development on Europe, on westernizing our society even before the association agreement, because we had to adopt pieces of legislation that make our society more open, more transparent, and more European. We have still a long way to go with the association agreement, and that are those legislative and procedural changes that are going to influence our society in respect of making it more democratic, more European, in respect of introducing and stabilizing European way of business, of producing, of economy, making our market more accessible for Europe and and our goods produced in Georgia more accessible for European markets, and that is normally going to have a positive effect on the foreign direct investment. So this is changes in the government, changes in the public administration, changes in society. I would say it's changes in business. It is the European agenda is also creating great opportunities, and I hope that Riga summit will be a good example of that, of making easier access for Georgian citizens to Europe, which is going to influence cultural, educational development, and generally Europeanization of our nation. And I think that all those advantages are potential in Georgia, and that is something that we will be using in future. Very briefly on the issue of control and freedoms, I think that Georgian society has taken its choice, and we have taken the choice for freedom and for specifically for free judiciary. This has been an issue that has been mentioned by speaker and an issue that has been debated a long time. So do we make judiciary system free, including the risks that it is free, or maintain one or the other for control over the judiciary? I can tell you that with all the problems that can be seen in the present government, the policy of present government towards judiciary has been very principled and something that I should applaud to, because since the new political power has been in government, it has basically making a very sustainable steps towards strengthening judiciary, and that means less control over the judiciary. What makes better judiciary are better judges. Parliament has approved all the candidates that have been presented by me for the new judges' candidacies in the Supreme Court, and they have recently approved the chairman of the Supreme Court, which is, I believe, the guarantee that that judiciary in this country will not be corrupted, and at the same time will not be under any political control. So what is our choice? Our choice is to have better qualified judges, and that will influence the reforms in the judiciary. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being responsive and concise, Mr. Speaker.
Well, there was one question addressed to me, and that question, as well as the person who asked this question, as well as our colleague, Mr. CDDRL, who asked the other question, they both represent the opposition UNM party. And I spoke about effectiveness and comparative analysis, which political group is more effective. This is another demonstration of the effectiveness of the UNM, because they managed to ask two questions, and nobody from Georgian Dream Coalition was able to ask questions. So that's another demonstration of the effectiveness. But the thing is that effectiveness not always means being right, because you could be effectively wrong. As it was the case during the previous government, when I spoke about effective the system of authority, effective system of power. Yes, that effective system of power was effective in doing good things and was very effective in doing bad things as well. And if some people are now questioned why those wrong things happened so effectively, and they are wanted by prosecutors, well, we need to ask the question why those things happened, not why the prosecutors are asking those questions. I don't know why leader B of UNM is in jail. What I know is that, well, there were people murdered, and the Strasbourg Court of Human Rights wrote that the judges are shocked after observing the level of conspiracy which involved everybody, starting from police, prosecutors, courts, president, government, in order to cover up that case. I know that's the fact. Who is asked the questions? I don't know, but probably somebody needed to be kept responsible. I don't know why leader C or D is in jail. I don't know. What I know is that there was grand corruption happening just immediately that democratic elections which brought Georgian Dream Coalition, democratic elections which brought Georgian Coalition to the power. When within 3 or 4 months before the elections, $30 million in cash disappeared from Tbilisi city account, from the budget money. And I believe somebody needs to answer the questions. I don't know who and why it is happening, and somebody concretely, I am not asked that question, and somebody else is asked that question. I don't know that. What I know is that when we, the opposition, had opposition rally here on the street some years ago, and after 3 or 5 days since your rally on March 21st, I was not able to sit on the conference like this and ask questions, because I was busy in searching of my friends who were beaten, kidnapped, and hidden in different police stations around the country. I was busy with that then. I did not have this ability to be on the conferences like this. And I believe that somebody was beating them, taking them, hiding them in police stations and so on. And if such questions are asked to anybody, I believe the questions must be asked. Therefore, this is not a question to me why certain people are kept responsible. I believe it's better to ask these questions to your leaders if they were involved in such things. Now about the sanctions. Parliament of Georgia adopted at least 3 resolutions on the issues in Ukraine. One of them we adopted together, if you remember. In all those resolutions, it is very clear that Parliament of Georgia urges international community, United States, European Union, NATO, everybody, to adopt all possible measures in order to protect sovereignty and freedom of Ukraine and in order to punish the aggressor in a proper way. All possible measures. If these all possible measures needs any explanation for you, I can explain. All possible measures mean all possible measures, all possible sanctions, all possible military actions, all possible diplomatic actions, all possible intelligence actions, all possible, and so on. All possible actions. That's what we said many times. I can repeat it many times again. Thank you.
Let's get an opposition perspective here, Mr. Alasania.
Well, I believe it was Socrates that said that treat your parents as you wish to be treated by your kids. So it can be translated to political reality saying treat your political opponents as you wish to be treated when you're going to be in the opposition. I think this argument could have been effectively made to the government that now is in the opposition and effectively can be made, David, to the government that you represent. Because just recently we had prosecutors' actions that demonstrated that they are still, as they've been used during the Saakashvili government as a political tool, is the same thing this government and the de facto leader of this country is using them as a political tool against the political opponents. Now, what can be done about this? I think, first of all, we need to, and the number of times that we've mentioned this together in our inner discussions as well, that the security and intelligence offices and the bureaucracy should not be engaged in political decision making. What we effectively have, the same thing that it was the instrumental in the previous government, was that security officers are making and calling the shots and making decisions in every local government office. That's wrong. That's to be changed, and I hope that you're going to be a good partner in changing this from your position where you are. I know it's difficult to make these habits disappear, but if we're not going to do this, the next government will be putting you and probably others as well through the hardships that now the other opposition leaders are going through. Now, in regards of Armenia, I think we all understand that Georgia has the very good neighborly relationship with Armenia, although they opted for some obvious reasons to align themselves security-wise with the Russian Federation. I think the strategic partners of Georgia, like Turkey, like the Azerbaijan, and us, and trilateral projects that we are making would not be complete, and the whole region would not have been effectively engaged in if Armenia will not be part of it down the road. We see it happening. Georgia has a convening power to, while having strategic partnership with the Azerbaijan and the good neighborly and close relationship with Armenia, to help in that. And I think Georgian government and Georgian people should be utilizing this convening power more and more in the future. And I hope we're going to do that. So in general, just to sum up, gentlemen and ladies, I think the discussions here produced, I think, very clear picture that Georgia is really solidly moving towards the west, towards the European, Euro-Atlantic community. We have bumps on the road, we have hiccups, of course, without the transitional democracy cannot be even seen, but I think we are progressing. We are better off than we were 15 years ago. We're better off than we were 5 years ago, and I'm pretty sure we're going to move forward with the public supporting the creation of the true liberal democracy in Georgia. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Baramidze.
Well, first of all, I would like to start with, once again, many thanks for organizing such a great platform for this open and public dialogue between us, thus supporting Georgian democracy to grow and mature. In the beginning, like a few remarks on the things that my friend David Usupashvili have mentioned on alleged crimes. I would like to just remind you that none of our political leaders been accused of those crimes that you have described. So that's the point. So from one hand, often government says that killings, somebody was beaten, tortured, and somebody took the money and like something like this. But these are not the issues that prosecutor presented against our leaders. So what we are talking about? So you had concerns on the side that have nothing to do with our leaders that are sitting in jail right now, including pretrial detention. And you said that I won't be able to sit. They are also not be able to sit here because maybe our Secretary General would sit here or our main campaign manager would sit here instead of me. They are not here. So let us not mix up things. Second, very briefly, all possible measures is too general, David. The sanctions are sanctions, and that means something when the politician is blunt, when the parliament and the society can express, on behalf of society, parliament can express itself and not to hide from the kind of vague formulas of all possible measures. We all know what we are talking about, and let's not play game, at least here. And finally, this discussion, yet another time, showed me, and I'm even stronger in my belief, that we are sitting in one boat. The name of this boat certainly is the Georgia. And we share absolutely, I'm sure, values and principles, and understanding how we have to together build this country. Therefore, I call to stop hatred, stop violent confrontation or radical confrontation against each other, and think how we can together, those who represent government and those us to represent the opposition, how we can play our role to make this country more civilized and more prosperous, more democratic, because we do have a role, we do have a responsibility, disregard of what position. So therefore, let's stick together, and I'll call you for the next process of constitutional change and electoral the reform system change. Let's stick together and work together. Thank you.
Okay, finally, David.
Just two very quick points. I want to come back to Ukraine, and it's to show what you shouldn't do. And this is not directed at the current government or the opposition. This is a broader point. Coming to power should not be viewed as the opportunity to enrich yourself, to take revenge against your enemies. It shouldn't be viewed as your turn. Coming to power, being in government, should be to serve the greater good. Whether you're in Georgia, whether you're in Ukraine, in the United States, anywhere. And so this is, again, not directed at the current government, it's not directed at the previous government. It is a point for all of us in this room to consider. Second point is a lighter point. In my career, whether in the State Department or at Freedom House or even now, I have been banned from or not allowed into Russia, Belarus, now Azerbaijan. I don't think I should go back to Egypt in light of what happened to Freedom House there. I just want to say thank you for welcoming me here in Georgia, where I feel very comfortable to actually be up here with a tremendous panel, and it's a great honor for me. But it's wonderful to be back here in your wonderful country and feel so welcome. Thank you very much.
Well, David, I think you can wear those bands as a badge of honor. I would like to thank our panelists for their candid engagement, and I think we've probed some very deep and serious questions, both internally and internationally and regionally. We're very grateful to you for your participation. And I've taken very extensive notes and learned a great deal. And the discussion will continue, but now we're going to have a coffee break. Thank you all very much.